on that audio panel. I don't know if you can see that right now. We'll shoot that to you right now as well. Well, why don't we get going? I don't know if it's going to take us the full hour, but I think we wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to provide you with an overview of what other states are doing. That was really a bigger takeaway from the last meeting. Beth, can you go to the next slide? So these are the main things we were trying to get through to today. Just a quick overview, recap of even the last meeting, and then spend the majority of the time on what other states are doing, kind of specific of what there's some learnings on these entities and the governance models. Get into a little bit of just the overview of what we discussed last time with the draft model of the kind of the governance framework, and then talk about, we really have 2 meetings left and how we are looking at approaching those, and just obviously would welcome feedback. We've got a really small group today, so I would encourage very informal. If you've got questions, interruptions, please don't hesitate just to cut me off or throw a comment or a question out there. So let me just first back up to this the recap of the 10-14 meeting, because there were some pieces I just want to make sure we're all clear on it. One, we had an action item that there was some discussion about having an oral health representative. So Katya and Jeff and I discussed, we've reached out to Mike Auerbach, the new executive director for the Dental Society, and Mike has agreed to participate. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here today, but he should be at our meeting next week. So we should have some oral health representation. And then Alice Ely also contacted us and was very interested in getting another member on. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Margaret Brown, manager of community health department at Dartmouth Hitchcock. So we've had some conversation with her. I think there's just also interest in potentially some other work groups, but obviously time is of the essence. So she also may be participating in next week's meeting. As you'll see today, we have more background on a lot of these other states and that hopefully can provide some clarity. And I'm really looking for you guys to see what are some other key elements that you're seeing within these states that we can draw upon and use in a New Hampshire model. Other pieces that we talked about last time, Neil sent us really the board composition criteria for the public health networks. So hopefully everybody had received that, had a chance to review that. And then thanks to Tess, we got out metrics on Vermont, and I sent some stuff out on Oregon. So there's just more background info on that. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to review that just a bit. Any questions on that? No? Okay.
No questions. A lot of reading material. Hi, this is Sue.
I know. I did load you guys up on a lot of stuff. I apologize.
One I couldn't print. It was 121 pages or something.
Well, Sue Ellen, good to hear you. I think we will try to keep this at a high level just for today's discussion. But if there's some deeper dives you want to get into, don't hesitate to let me know. I'm not coming into this meeting saying I'm a SIM expert, but I think there's a high enough level understanding that we can certainly talk at a higher level what some of these states are doing. Beth, next slide. So in a nutshell, this is what it's looking like across the land when you start looking at round 1 and round 2 in terms of the states working on SIM. And these core areas of service delivery, payment reform, and then of course the third piece that we'll talk a little bit more about having to do with population health. But these really have been these areas, and much like New Hampshire, these are the core areas. But I think what we're struggling with a bit is how do we have an entity that is kind of sitting outside of that to a certain degree. And I think that's where we want to have some learnings from other states. Next slide. And this is just another layout that I pulled from Kaiser that just starts to show you of how really these are the round 2 states of how they line up in comparison to their focus areas, from primary care, specialty care, behavioral health, all the way across. I think our interest has been on those ones on the right, specifically dealing with public health, and community-based organizations and social services, and kind of seeing how do we actually start to bring those elements together. Next slide. And as you were reading through, these state summaries, you really have these common factors or common themes throughout: care coordination, transformation facilitation, TA, all of that, workforce development, health IT, education engagement, all the things that really have been talked about even within the New Hampshire SIM. And these are really just the CMMI core pieces of SIM that everybody's trying to bring to the table. Next slide. But I really want to focus on this slide because, this to me is a crucial piece, and one that we haven't really discussed at length. But when you start to dissect what these states are doing, it really comes down to, I think, these two pieces, and you feel free to push back, but really you have many states that are focused on delivery reform and talking about it through a lens of a risk-bearing or a healthcare delivery entity. And how are they taking Medicaid reform and potentially using that vehicle or that entity to do more population health-based work. But it's all kind of within that context. The second piece is how do you have something really that's almost outside of that, but a regional community entity that really is just focused on population health. And I think our struggle, I really kind of heard it even at the last meeting, was going back and forth between the two. Well, when you're talking about a governance structure, is it a governance structure for a risk-bearing entity, or is it really focused more on a population health-based approach? And I think, we've been struggling a bit even as we've been trying to develop this model. As you look at the lower piece of this, well, we're pursuing an 1115 Medicaid waiver to really focus on integrated delivery networks that would be really on the ground, on the healthcare delivery side. But then also taking a step back and trying to have a bigger perspective from the SIM side of what would a regional healthcare cooperative extension look like. And I think, what I've talked to Katja and Jeff about, and I think they were very apologetic to, actually, Katja, I see her name on, but I know they've been working diligently on the 1115, and I think trying to make some significant progress with that. But really for the purposes of this work and this governance work group, really trying to stay focused on what are those core elements specific to this regional healthcare cooperative extension, which then leads us into really this number 2 area of what are these other states doing that have regional community entities that are focused on population health. Questions, comments on that? Because I do want to make sure that we kind of, we're all on the same page there.
Nope.
Can you summarize what's come out of the practice transformation work group as far as the healthcare delivery options that they're seeing?
Can I summarize it? Sure. I think what they're really trying to figure out is an integrated approach of care coordination that can start with a primary care medical home and give you kind of these levels of integration. And they kind of are really looking at a continuum, and a lot of it is based on some Medicare work, and really trying to understand where any primary care office may be and allow them to move across the continuum. And the issue is really with these regional healthcare cooperative extensions, what are the necessary resources and support tools that would be needed to help these organizations make that kind of transformation into a more integrated type of care. And we have all of their documentation. I think I sent some stuff out, but I can actually send out more work on their behalf. So again, I want to highlight this because the last time we talked, there was I think some back and forth of thinking more of an ACO type of concept, and what should this regional healthcare cooperative extension look like in terms of almost an ACO. I kind of wanted to pull us back a bit, saying, well, the way this is really outlined within the SIM, it's not that. However, it could be an amazing complement to what Katja and Jeff are really working on with the 1115. And Katja, I see you on mute there. If you please weigh in if there is anything that you guys want to add on. Next slide.
So, Mike, can I add, this is Neil, everybody. So I noticed, I do have a note to myself as I read some notes. In the practice transformation work group PowerPoint that you sent around, I did make a note that it looked as though they were talking about one statewide center of excellence around practice transformation, then supported with regional centers, which was an intriguing model to me because as I think about all of this, I wonder if the practice transformation can't happen at a sort of larger geographic level than the community population health piece of this. I think needs to happen at a smaller geographic level.
Right.
So it's an intriguing idea. And then I think for really small states like New Hampshire, there's also the idea of if you have a lead statewide entity around practice transformation, could you have a few, don't know what the number is, but small, number of really specialty centers under that could be dispersed geographically.
Well, Neil, I think you're onto something, and I think the practice transformation group is as well. And again, I kind of look to Katya and Jeff in terms of how far we go, but I think the next phase of this is to put together a straw model for your review that does incorporate some of these concepts. So if you look through that practice transformation slide deck, there was this element of a center of excellence. I think one thing that's also being discussed is if we have something that could be a center of excellence, does it just need to be practice transformation, or could that be all-encompassing so that you really have something that can be helping connect these regional healthcare extensions? I think that's been a concern that, we wouldn't want to have these regions out there and just be silos. They've got to be connected and actually have the support and resources that they need. So I think that's the hope, and I think, what I am hopeful that we can actually start to show you a broader model of what that straw model may look like very, very soon.
Great.
So on the next slide, I've highlighted 5 states. And, as you were looking through this, you may have seen, some other states that may have been more attractive or intriguing, and I would be happy to kind of hear your perspective. But these were the 5 that stuck out specifically because they really were focused more on the number 2 component of the previous slide of being a regional community entity. Many of these states, have these ACOs or primary care medical home, really at the core of delivery, potentially taking a payment, taking risk, and then also doing population health, but not in its own. So these were the 5 that I saw, had great similarities to what the New Hampshire model was looking like. So I just wanted to make sure that we had time just to kind of review what these folks are doing. I've had conversations with a few of these states, and I think what came up in the last conversation was, okay, well, what are these other states doing? How far along are they? And what can we learn from? Well, I think there are some interesting pieces that they put together, but I think it's safe to say everybody is still in the very, very, very early stages. I don't think anybody could hang their hat on, this is the model. Some of them haven't even begun. I mean, in some respects, New Hampshire is farther along than some of these. But again, I think there's some, you can read all of these from Accountable Communities for Health all the way through. There's a lot of parallels though.
Yeah, although I have to say a number of them I noticed spoke about really the population health component of this, sort of at a very high level. It was part of the narrative, but they drilled down a lot more on what the clinical and payment transformation would look like than what some of this community health component would look like.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that has been a core theme of SIM. That I think it's been an amazing project, but at the same time, everybody has to check the boxes of what they're doing, and they have to check the box on population health. And I would say some are doing it with a bit more intent and purpose than others have, and others have focused much more on, whether it's payment reform or delivery reform.
Yeah.
Next slide. So Minnesota, I found this one to be an interesting model, and if you guys spent some time just reading it, I mean, this one, I think they've made it very clear that they really are interested in seeding on the ground projects immediately, and seeing what can develop and what are some best practices that they can build upon. So, you know, they're really looking at just putting money out there and grant money out there to, you know, local organizations that can show that they've got a good idea that can actually help link projects that are being clinical, social determinants of health, all under one umbrella. You know, so they wanted to move quickly. The sustainability of this, I think, is a bigger question. I think, you know, they really have done, Minnesota has always done some amazing work, but I think they just want to get money out the door to get some of these pilots up and running. So I think there's still a lot to determine in terms of just long-term sustainability. But again, an interesting one just to figure out, you know, here, you know, they had put an RFP process out. Here's the criteria that they're looking for. They had to meet that, and then, you know, they're off and running, and they've got, you know, money out in these communities. Next slide. So Connecticut was another one, health enhancement committees or communities, and you know, again, I think a noble vision. But I would highlight it's a vision that's 2019. So they've got a lot of work around accountable care and delivery reform and payment reform moving up over the next, you know, 3 to 4 years. And then this is, you know, I think their long-term vision around how do they get there. But very similar, how do you have a governance structure that includes all of these different types of entities, from, you know, the delivery system to the business world to nonprofits, and then really have this, you know, focus on unmet needs and have everybody kind of around the table. So are there lessons learned? I think there are some elements there that we could be looking at, but again, I think they could be even farther out than New Hampshire is in terms of actually getting some of this stuff up and running. Next slide.
The piece I liked about this one was the last bullet that focused really on disparities and stuff.
Yeah.
And particularly when I think of states like New Hampshire, where we are relatively healthy overall, relatively wealthy overall, you know, I think this is maybe a focus we want to keep in mind.
Good point. So Delaware, healthy neighborhood communities, similar, and some of these states, I should say, that, you know, have gotten this bigger chunk of SIM funding. It has been easier on them, so that they can really allocate a chunk of that SIM money to do a lot of this regional community-based work. So easier for them to maybe have some of the grant monies out there and just to move it quickly, as opposed to New Hampshire, if there's looking at a round 3 or whatever other funding source, you know, how do we actually, you know, create a model where it, 1, is sustainable, but 2, we can actually start to get money out and really help these communities. But here's, you know, their basic piece, those core responsibilities, health scorecard, you know, implementing these healthy neighborhoods, and then linking that to their overall state population health plan. Next slide, I think I got another one on Delaware. So they've got into more specifics around what the oversight committee for each one needs to look like. Similar language, you're seeing it: diverse expertise, experience, clinical leaders, you know, expertise in public health, all the way through. The one interesting thing I hadn't seen in other ones is just the grants management expertise. And I think, you know, even our group has had, obviously, you know, good representation with community funders, which I think was actually helped us bring that perspective to the table. But again, these are out a ways in terms of just getting these guys up and running before they get money out the door. Next slide. So Michigan, and we talked about Michigan last time, and I would say Michigan, of all the states right now, is the one that probably has the closest similarities to New Hampshire. And so their model right now on the population health side is what they're calling the shires, the community health innovation regions. And these shires, I think, again, have the closest similarities to the New Hampshire Regional Healthcare Extension Collaborative, or Collaborative Extension. Alternatively, if you remember when we talked about Michigan before, they also have an entity that they're looking at setting up that is specific to the delivery side, and that is accountable systems of care. And that's going to be specific on the Medicaid side. So it really would parallel very much what New Hampshire would be looking at when it's 1115 waiver, and would be moving forward with integrated delivery networks. So you really would have these entities that are responsible for on-the-ground delivery reform, with the state really helping drive that through its contractual relationships on the Medicaid side, trying to build a bigger coalition of a multi-payer approach. And then on a broader perspective, you have these regional entities that are really trying to move forward on bigger population health-based initiatives. So they're really seeing these shires as the hubs that would be connected. One shire could be connected to multiple accountable systems of care and providing, support services to that entity. Where are they in the process? They still have a long way to go. They're hopeful to get some things launched in 2016. They've got some political dynamics. They've got a legislative session coming up. They have funding issues at the state within the state legislature, much like everybody. And they also have a behavioral health carve-out, which they're trying to work around and trying to figure out how can they, abide by that, but yet not get caught up in that when they try to bring in their integrated approach with their accountable systems of care. So, again, I think the Michigan model has probably the most similarities, and again, further along than New Hampshire is right now. Next slide. So, and I think you have some background info on this. But much like we've been talking about with our regional entities, they have outlined even more, and I think I sent out even like the checklist of what they're looking at in terms of shires, and it's very detailed in terms of everything from decision-making structure to accountability to finance. But they're also looking at it in terms of you can have a backbone organization, really be helping support this, yet you have that broad sense and demonstration of community support. Questions, comments on Michigan?
So I feel like I'm the only one doing any talking.
No, go now.
I'll add, I was intrigued by this as well. I mean, really much of what they talked about for these shires doing is essentially mirrors what we've done through the public health networks. When you look at collaborative health assessments, health improvement plans, bringing stakeholders to the table, shared improvement planning, et cetera, the piece for us that's really missing from the public health network approach with this is a really intensive, strong linkage to the clinical side of the shop. It's there in some measure in some regions, but it's certainly not as robust as it would need to be, for our purposes today. But we certainly would not have to reinvent the wheel or throw the baby out with the bathwater, to my mind.
So, Neil, can you expand on that a little bit? So I've been thinking about that too, and I'm very interested in others' thoughts about when you look at this and then you see what you already have with public health networks, and not wanting to start from scratch. How do you see things potentially evolving?
Oh, that's a hard question to answer off the top of my head. I really wouldn't want to put out any ideas right now about whether it's again going back to this, would there be perhaps a single center of excellence on the clinical side. I think to a large extent we have that already on the public health side with our Public Health Institute at the Community Health Institute. And then maybe a smaller number than 13, which is our number of public health networks, a smaller number of more specialized clinical sub-centers of excellence, if you will, could be aligned with some of the host agencies for the public health networks, again, because some of them, are in hospitals, they're in community health centers, et cetera. We would need those folks to tell us how doable that might be for them to add on this other piece around the clinical transformation. My guess is there's a reasonable number of them that it would be relatively, relatively reasonable for them to take this on with some adequate support and resources and whatnot. On the real community health side, I mean, I would stay invested in the current alignment that we have of our 13 public health networks, because I think when you look at community neighborhood population health, you just need to do that on a little bit finer geographic level than you might need to do clinical transformation.
Got it. Thanks.
Hi, this is Sue Ellen. It keeps, in my mind, it keeps going back to that public health network, and Neil, maybe you certainly could be able to talk to this. Are they all equally strong in their regions, or are some obviously a little further along than others? And would it be worthwhile to think about that as sort of the center of where we're going?
Yeah, to answer your first question, no, they are not all equally strong. And the one that you are a member of up in the Upper Valley is perhaps one of the strongest. So you see really the place where I would like them all to be maybe in another couple of years. But with that in mind, I do think they all, there's enough infrastructure there in all of them at this point, other than one, other than dairy, which again is just very formative at this point, but we have very good hopes for, because we have a strong new vendor coming in shortly that we think can really bring them up to speed so that they start to get to the level that most everybody else is at. But I think there's enough there, and there's enough investment there, investment in terms of money and time and resources and people's commitment to them and engagement in them and whatnot, that that there's certainly enough there to build on, and I think we would be foolhardy to try to do something different. But I'm a little biased.
Thanks. I can see why that would be, but you're right. We have such a good one up here that it looks like it could really perform that function well.
Right. And where they sit, because it is has strong affiliations with Dartmouth, that was certainly one of the ones that I think of which ones could take on some of this clinical transformation stuff. I think that would be a pretty easy quote unquote in context, reach for them.
Hi, this is Jess. I'm trying to follow all along, and I'm such a visual person. I want to go backwards with some of your slides and sort of relook at them. So I'm trying to sort of imagine what each of these sort of options that you're putting there, how that would work in New Hampshire. And I sent an email to Mike earlier, a week or so ago, kind of just trying to get my head around this a little bit more. And so I guess I would say it in a brief way by saying sort of form follows function. So what I'm still trying to understand is what is that function that we're trying to achieve, because that will make a significant difference about where you want to make your investments to sort of build up your whatever that infrastructure needs to look like. So I think, Mike, you were talking, I think maybe Michigan, I'm not even sure now which one it was, but you were talking about that it was under a Medicaid, sort of a rubric of Medicaid. And so I'm sort of borrowing my Vermont hat right now and involved in the implementation of the SIMS work in Vermont, where they chose an ACO model to sort of drive some of their healthcare reform, because they're doing payment reforms. And so when you were, with all payers, Medicaid, Medicare, and commercial. And so when you put, and I don't remember which one it was, you were putting up something about Medicaid, and it made me think of here in New Hampshire, where, you know, the Medicaid program is clearly going to be run through the commercial market. And so we're bridging, you know, our Medicaid expansion population and putting them into the exchange. So just if you were thinking about doing Medicaid, a Medicaid sort of all-payer, Medicaid and then Medicare and commercial, the infrastructure and ability that you'd need to be able to contract and negotiate for payments for your institution, whatever this infrastructure is tremendous. And that's just on the Medicaid side because of all the different payers. And then you'd add, you know, your Medicaid side in too. So what I still can't get my head around, what are we building this for? And that would just help me out so much to sort of better understand what capacity do these institutions need to have, and who's best suited for that. So I'm sorry, I'm still a little stuck, and I know we're trying to create that so that if an opportunity, it was one of the first questions that I asked, which is there's no SIM 3 money right now, at least what we know of. And so we're trying to create something so that it's sort of, and build these straw models so that if we were to be able to make investments, this is what we as sort of collectively these groups have kind of thought, you know, that would work pretty well. So there, I just keep getting stuck on it, and so it's hard for me to make a recommendation on any of these models unless I sort of knew a little bit more about what we hope to gain. So
sure, and Tessa, I'll take a crack, and I would really, I think if Katja can weigh in, I would welcome that. And I think, you know, again, I'm coming from this from a SIM perspective of what New Hampshire has already outlined. And I think, again, those are the key elements we're going to see if we can continue to build on. But specifically, when it comes to these New Hampshire regional entities, that we've been pretty specific in saying we want to have, you know, entities that really can help support practice transformation. We need entities that can really help support health IT integration and connectivity. And we need entities that really can help drive population health. Those are the three things that have been outlined in terms of core functions of what we want these regional entities to be able to do. And when I take a step back and I look at, you know, what we've been doing in Oregon, and, you know, we've got our Medicaid transformation going, for the most part, on that, within that population, it's been, I would say it's been successful, but huge limitations. We don't have any regional entity to help drive any of this. We don't have a regional entity really helping move population health forward. It's all in the CCOs, but it's just very much on a Medicaid focus, and it's very limited. So I think, again, when I look at a Michigan model or look at, you know, potential around New Hampshire, I think there is great potential because you're starting to kind of fill in the dots around, you know, some voids right there. So I don't know if that helps, Tess, but I mean, I think that's kind of been the core elements of what we've been trying to build around. And Katja, please weigh in if needed.
I'm not sure it's needed. I had to step out while Tess was speaking, but I think I have a sense of what she's addressing. I have struggled with this as well, and that's why I am somewhat biased like Neil is, because I have something that is in mind. I know that there's something that's out there that's working. When you just outlined the 3 areas of focus that the regional entities are to address, it occurred to me that those sound like, they sound like almost a hodgepodge. They're potpourri. But then when we look at the Public Health Network and what they've been able to accomplish in the different areas that they're addressing as well, it becomes more concrete for me. So it's a struggle, and that's why we're having this process. There is no predetermined way within which to structure this. The other thing I'll add is that I do know it's difficult to try to do this without having that cross-pollination with the other groups, because I learn when we get together weekly to have our meetings, I learn a lot about what's happening in the other groups, and I struggle with how we're going to fit these all together.
And just if I can weigh into that, Katja, I think the one good thing is that, not getting too far ahead of ourselves, but the next meeting that we have next week, which is scheduled for Tuesday, it's the day before all the other work groups. So I've asked my colleagues of the other 4 to come and give a brief overview to all of us, so that we can at least get a better understanding and dialogue with them. Because it's really, we want to understand how we're going to take their components of practice transformation or health IT or community initiatives and begin to integrate that into whatever that governance model is going to look like. But I guess I still want to keep pushing that, I want you guys to be thinking more about even the public health networks, to say, yeah, you already have, a system in place. Can that be used? I mean, to go back and think about creating your own shire or your own, new community, is that needed? Is that going to be in the best interest of the state, or can you actually build upon what you guys have already been doing? I think that's a big one for this group to weigh in on.
Yeah. Thank you, Katja, and thank you, Mike. That helps. Those 3 areas. At one point, we had talked about having you talk about practice transformation in health IT and population health, but we also inserted, to the degree that we can, kind of the public health nature and primary care, kind of a no wrong door sort of access for people to come into a system of care. And you didn't mention that in the 3, and I didn't know whether or not that was just something that we had talked about, or was not kind of cross-pollinated with the other groups.
No, it has been. I think it's definitely been part of practice transformation. I think it would be great. We'll hear from Susan next week, and I think it's something for this group to weigh in on. And Tess, I remember that conversation last month, and many times that conversation really begins to focus around an ACO type model. And I think the question is, if you're having a regional entity that's not really part of the delivery system, and certainly not even part of a payment system, what leverage does it have to create that? And I think that's kind of been the challenge of even some of these other entities. It's much more based on goodwill than it is based on really contractual relationships and really trying to drive change.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we're going to try to find any federal funding to help support this, which we clearly would need to do, it would have to track with what the Secretary is sort of wanting for payment transformation.
Right.
And so, right, that's really where you have your leverage. And when you gave us the slides on the building IDNs, the responsibility of the lead entity, right. and if we're staying with that, and I know Katja said, there's nothing predetermined, but there are things that the state has been in sort of a framework or structure that the state's been supported to do. And if we have what's requested in these slides that we got in October onto this sort of potentially public health network or whatever this entity is, that's also a capacity issue, and the question becomes, how many of these do you need to build in order to support 1.3 million people? And so it's kind of a capacity and resource question.
It absolutely is, Tess, and I think, again, you look at some of these other states that we're highlighting now, and they're in a different spot. I mean, they've got a significant amount of SIM funding just to help get this launched, and we would be talking about it probably without all of that upfront investment. Right. And that's the question of how do you make that work?
Yeah, right. Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And to your point, Tess, about how many, again, to my mind, the answer may well be different between how many for the population/community health component of this and how many do you need for payment reform or practice transformation, which I would suggest is a lot fewer than what you need for population health.
Got it.
Thanks, Neil.
Guys, any other thoughts, comments on this? This is helpful. Okay, Beth, next slide. So Washington, so last state, you know, so they have focused on accountable communities of health. Interesting conversations with some of my colleagues in Washington who are heavily involved in this. I think I also sent out something to you on Washington around this relationship that they're looking at having between the ACHs and their MCOs that run their Medicaid program. And obviously there's been a lot of stepping on toes of who's doing what. Are these risk variances or not? It sounds like it's a, honestly, it sounds like it's very anxiety-ridden, and I think there's a lot of confusion right now. It sounds like there's an interest in the state to make the ACHs being able to be somewhat risk-bearing and to have a little bit more accountability. I think they've had some struggles in terms of just keeping it too loose and saying, okay, here's the framework, everybody come together. And I think a lot of people have been looking at each other saying, well, how do we do it? And what are we going to be doing? So I think that one, they're still trying to get things launched within the next year. And there's a few that have been out of the gate, but even those that are out of the gate, I think are still having a lot of questions as to how they actually pull this off. They just don't necessarily have it.
Was that a state you were talking about?
Washington. So within Washington, they have, you know, their regions that have already been defined.
Yeah.
These accounts, right? So within, I've got a few friends who are actually working within these ACHs, and one of them is kind of at the forefront leading the charge, and she's been very clear saying, wow, we don't really know what we're doing right now. And, you know, she said, I think the vision's great. We've got, you know, a lot of planning there, but I think there's a lot of payers and others who are just really unclear of how all this stuff plays out. So I think there's some hesitation in terms of just how much they really jump into this right now. But again, they're trying to check the boxes of all the SIM activities.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, that's actually really for us as kind of an exercise about kind of lessons learned. So if we end up sort of creating something that we can come to consensus on, or have some framework to it, that that we kind of at least think through operationally what this would look like and what would be the things that you'd need to do in order to really make it functional, because, you know, it's such a different game to go from like a planning document to an implementation document. And so
absolutely.
Often that is what happens, where you think, oh, that's a great plan, but then when you really get down to, you know, having the capacity to do it, you think, whoa, not sure we can do that.
Yep.
So, having kind of visioning out a little bit more once we've figured out what that might look like and the resources. So, thanks.
Got it. Next slide. So similar to others, as you've read through this, just the governing body, balanced, multi-sector, you know, you can kind of see what they've put down there in terms of their participation requirements. But same thing in terms of they say, yes, we can have a backbone entity or entities be responsible for helping, you know, get this thing off the ground. Next slide. So guys, we got about 10 minutes left, and this is just a quick overview. We're not going to get into the deep dive discussion until next week in terms of, you know, getting back into the framework that we've put forward. But I do want to, you know, take any input or reflections around what you've seen from other states or what other work you think we really need to get into to help really start to drive this more. So next slide. We had three big things that we've been kind of some recurring themes for us as we talk about a New Hampshire governance model. The one is flexibility. we talk about it from a regional, variations, that we want to make sure that whatever is out there is flexible. And you guys know better than I do in terms of just how that public health network, the flexibility around that has worked, or if changes are needed. Next. No unnecessary administrative burden, so that if we do something different with these regional entities, we're not actually looking at creating more obstacles and burdens for folks trying to move this work forward. And then last slide. Trying to make sure that there is a value add, that we're not just putting an organization together just for an organization's sake, just like Tess was just saying. Some of the lessons learned as we're looking at some of these states, just still on paper it looks great, but then in reality it becomes much more difficult. So I think that thinking through what that value add is along the continuum. Next slide. So this is where we kind of left off last week, last month, with our 7 core criteria. And the one change, if you look at the far left-hand corner, we had some wordsmithing that I actually think was helpful when we started talking about a new or existing entity, and I think just talking about it from an operating entity. What does that look like? What are those the core elements there? Board composition, accountability, financial, clinical, IT, oversight, and community engagement. We had some conversation last month around, should we have an 8th box that would be focused on population health? We didn't land anywhere. We just said that's something we may continue to discuss. And so the remaining slides that I have just, again, go into a very high-level overview of those pieces that we've talked about from all those 7. And again, the purpose of today was to say, are there anything that we've seen from other states, or we want to incorporate from other states into a potential governance framework? The pieces on financial, clinical, IT, and community engagement, those are the pieces that I do want you to have a bit more exposure just to the other work groups. And so we're really going to try to frame up the next meeting where, one, you really have a chance to have some dialogue with these work group leads, a good 15, 20 minutes. And then also I want to talk to Katya and Jeff in terms of just what we could be looking at in terms of even a strong model for you guys to review and really start to think through as well. Beth, why don't you just go through those quickly? Board makeup, go ahead. Accountability, keep going. Financial, keep going. We'll just keep going through those 7. Clinical. So this is where I really want the clinical team, the practice transformation team, to really provide the governance work group. What are the core elements that should be incorporated in terms of clinical oversight? And that's the group that's been really working through that. Next. And really the same thing on the IT data oversight. And then lastly, that's the next one, same thing on the community engagement with the community initiatives. We want to be able to take their work and begin to take those core elements and put it into a governance framework. Okay, next. And next one. So this is where we're at. And I really would just love for you guys to be able to take some time, and we'll get all this stuff out to you. But even in prep of next meeting, there are things that you're really looking at when you start looking at other states or other elements from the public health network to test some of the things that you're bringing up. Okay, what do we need to be thinking through in terms of connecting the dots? What are these other pieces around governance that we need to be thinking through? We'll have those updates from the 4 work groups, and then we really want to start to get into finalizing over the next couple meetings.
I apologize for my sneeze.
That's all right.
I have to actually scoot to another meeting, and I am out of town next week, so I won't be here. But it sounds like, Mike, you're going to get us the slides that you just put in, and so I won't have any more time to work on this until after you guys have your meeting. But I wanted to just extend my gratitude for how responsive you've been and the work that you've done.
Oh, well, thanks, Tess. Well, and hopefully you can be there at the following meeting, which will be the first week in December. We'll land on the specific times and dates and get that out to everybody as soon as we can.
Great. Good.
Katya, anything
So I'm going to sign off.
end?
I gotta scoot to another meeting, and I really appreciate your time.
Got it. Thanks, Tess.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
Katya, anything on your end?
No, I am in the same boat. I got to scoot to another meeting.
Okay. Hey, well, guys, I really appreciate it. Anything that comes up, even as you're reading through this, questions, comments, feel free to send me an email or give me a call, and we'll see what we can do to really incorporate this for the next meeting.
Great.
Thanks.
We'll get all this out to you soon. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.